Well, yeah, for Pete's sake, my goodness, for all of our sakes. Well, Pete certainly had a very strong influence on me in my younger years, especially my younger years, but also up to within about 19 years ago was my last conversation with him. Let's see, I first met Pete in it was 1957. Because I was just out of the Army. I was back living home for a few weeks with my parents, and I got a phone call from somebody. Turned out to be Pete's agent, and he asked if we could sponsor Pete in a Seattle concert at the Moore Theater. And we were the Seattle Folk Singing Society. And I was being president of it, much to the discomfort of the FBI. But so a whole bunch of us gathered together, you and John and Nancy Hubbard and Irwin Nash, and we all ran around town. We silk screened posters, and we promoted the Pete Seeger concert. Then just a few days before Pete arrived, I got a phone call from Zolly Volchuk at the Moore Theater, and they said, Pete needs a place to stay, and by the way, he's bringing Sonny Terry with him. So I said, sure. So without asking my parents' permission, because I knew better, I invited them to stay at my parents' house. So in '57, I don't remember what time of the year, probably spring, Pete and Sonny Terry and Sonny's cousin, J.C. Burris, stayed at my house for 5 days, and I, ran around town doing concert promotion, took them here, took them there, TV stations, radio stuff for interviews. And, of course, I was, 19 or 20, just out of the Army and still green behind the ears. But I have two really neat memories of my first times with Pete. This was at a time when he was just trying to break out of the blacklist, and nobody would give him the time of day. Nothing commercial, no commercial radio. Television was just coming into its own, but he was blacklisted during the McCarthy era. And so this was a big deal. This was his avenue of escape, one of his first avenues of escape from the blacklist. So he kind of hibernated himself in a guest bedroom my parents had, and said he really needed to be left alone and prepare for the concert, and that was fine. I understood all that. Of course, we'd hear him in the bedroom wailing away on the banjo and singing or working on the guitar, whatever. And then the afternoon of that particular concert, I don't remember, probably on a Sunday afternoon, he come bouncing out of the bedroom and with his banjo, came up to me and he says, "Hey," he says, "I just finally completed a song." He says, "It's a song called "Oh, Had I a Golden Thread?" And he said, "I have just completed the final verse." He says, "And now I'm happy with the song. What do you think of it?" So he did this. Oh, had I a golden thread and needle so fine, I'd weave a magic strand of rainbow design, in it I'd weave the bravery of women giving birth, in it I'd weave the innocence of children round the earth, children round the earth, far over the waters, I'd weave my magic strand to every single town, to every single land, to every land. I tell my brothers and my sisters my rainbow design. Bind up this sorry world with hand and heart and mind, hand and heart and mind. Oh, had I a golden thread and needle so fine, I'd weave a magic strand of rainbow design, of rainbow design. The next time I saw Pete was 2 years later, and I was working for Gordon Tracy at the folk store, 42nd University Way. You remember it, Sally. And I was supposedly being a student, and I was about as bad at it as Seeger was, because I was hawking records one day in Pete's store, and Pete was in Seattle. In Gordon Tracy's store, Pete was in Seattle for another concert, and he came into the store and we started chitter-chatting, and finally I couldn't contain myself, and I said, "Pete, I have decided I am going to follow your example. I'm going to drop out of school and I'm going to travel the country." And I want to tell you, he chewed my ass. He kicked butt on me for half an hour, telling me, "Don't do it, don't do it, get your education first, get your education first." And of course I didn't listen to him. And God, I didn't end up completing school for another 20 years, but I eventually did. Then there's one more really kind of very poignant, I think, and very important contact that I have with Pete. You'll appreciate this, Sally. When my late friend Walt Robertson died 19 or 20 years ago, Mark Moss, who was being editor of Sing Out magazine back in Pennsylvania, he called me, and he had heard that I was a good friend of Walt's, and so he asked me to write the obituary for Sing Out magazine for Walt Robertson. So so I agreed to do it. I couldn't even spell writer, let alone be one in those days. It scared the heck out of me. But anyway, over the next few weeks, I talked to a lot of people, Don Firth and Patty and others that knew Walt. But I called Mark Moss back one day, and because I had a deadline coming up, and I was asking him some technical questions about, how many words and what do you want me to say, and trying to keep myself from panic. And as I'm talking to him, Pete Seeger walked in Mark's office, because Pete was in those days still being on the board of directors of Sing Out magazine. So Mark put him on another telephone. We had a 3-way conversation. We talked for half an hour. It was more fun than wheels, because Pete remembered Walt quite well and told about a lot of personal stories, and some of which I ended up including in the obituary that was published in Sing Out when Walt passed away. So that's pretty much my remembrances of Pete, other than he, to me, always exemplified the best and the purest. He was the best light there was in folk music of the 1900s. He somehow kept the vision, and he somehow, I don't know how he did it, remained very true to himself. He remained very enamored and in awe of the beauty of our traditional folk music, taught me how to respect it. And he just seemed to remain so true to his beliefs and to himself throughout his whole life. Now that you mention that, I remember you talking about his shyness and his awkwardness. I remember something vividly. He was very awkward all the time at my parents' home. And over the years, I have figured out that his awkwardness, I think this blacklisting had really impacted him, had really kicked his feet out from under him, more than he probably would have ever liked to have let on. And he was feeling really unsure of himself in some situations. I remember thinking that at the time. Of course, at the time, I wasn't mature enough to really appreciate the ins and outs of the blacklist. I did appreciate it later when I was about 16 and the Seattle FBI office telephoned me and suggested I drop in for a visit there at the federal office building, 2nd and Cherry in Seattle. So I'm 16, I said, oh sure, I'll go on down. So I went in, 16-year-old kid scared to death. I'm still in high school, believe it or not. And this guy in the traditional shiny shoes and blue suit, he sits down, introduces himself, never smiled once. Most unsmiling guy I ever met. When I walked in, on his desk he had a manila folder about that thick. And he took it and put it in his desk, opened it up the first page and says, "We know all about you." And he pointed at the stack of papers. And he said, "This is your file. We have a file on you." I said, "Really? That's really cool. What's it say?" I said, "Well, you're being president of the Seattle Folk Singing Society." I said, "I knew that. I admit, I knew that." Well, he said, "We understand there's a lot of communists in the group." I said, "Oh, okay. I didn't know that." At the time, I thought communism was spelled with a K. I really did. I knew nothing about that. So, well, why do you let communists in the group? And I said, well, they let me in the group. It seemed like a fair deal. So we went round and around and around for a while, and I honestly couldn't fathom why I was there, what he was after. And then finally he said, "Well, we want you to go to work for us." I said, "Really? What am I supposed to do?" He said, "Well, you meet once a month." And he said, "You're being president of the Seattle Folk Singing Society." He said, "So you must have access to the membership list." I said, "Oh, yeah. I think I'm probably on the membership committee. I don't remember." He said, "Well, we'd like a copy of the membership list, and as new members come in, will you keep us informed?" He says, "Because we know a lot of them are communists that are on the faculty at University of Washington." And so I said, "Well, let me go home and think about it." And I went home and thought about it, never called him back, never had any more contact with them directly. Years later, 7 or 8 years later, Don Firth told me he had the identical experience at the identical time, because he also was being a member of the Seattle Folk Singing Society. But in 1955, when I volunteered for the Army, I went in right out of high school. In those days, you had to sign a loyalty oath to join the American Army. So I'm sitting out there at Fort Lawton, and they give me these 3 pages, the loyalty oath. Do you, Robert D. Nelson, swear allegiance to the Constitution and no overthrow of the government, and you always put sugar in your tea and all this stuff. And there was 3 pages listed. You're going to love this, Sally. 3 pages listed of organizations. And they said, have you not heard this story before? They said, have you ever had any contact with these organizations? And there's 3 pages. So I take, oh yeah, check. Seattle Labor Council, check it, yeah. Committee for the Protection of the Foreign Born, check mark, yeah. Committee to overturn the Smith Act, oh sure, yeah, check. And this lieutenant was watching me. His eyes got bigger and bigger, and finally I checked it all off and signed it and handed it to him. He said, "Don't you go anywhere, I'll be right back." And so he comes back with a captain. This is Fort Lawton. And he looks at this and he's going through the pages. He says, "Well, what's your contact with the Seattle Labor Council?" I said, I sing there one Friday night a month. They give me all the spaghetti I can eat and $5. "Well, what's this Committee for the Protection of the Foreign Born?" I said, "That's Cecilia Cora's group. She plays a Clark Irish harp and she sings in Gaelic." And we just go right down the list like this. He says, "Well, why do you sing all these communist songs?" And I said, "Well, they got the best songs." And I started saying, "Oh, we are marching to Pretoria, Pretoria, and I'm with you and you with me, and so we will sing together." Anyway, so that was my experience with the FBI. There is a tag to that story. After I signed all the loyalty oath, I wasn't sworn in yet. The captain said, "You go home, we'll be in touch with you." I said, "Okay, that's great." For the next 2 days, I'm still living at home with my folks. The next 2 days, 2 FBI agents went all around my neighborhood out by Normandy Park and knocked on all the neighbor doors and interviewed the neighbors. "What can you tell about this guy, Bob Nelson? Is he really a communist?" And all my neighbors knew me. I've been singing there since grade school. "Oh no, he's just fine." So they decided I was going to be safe in the Army was going to be safe from me.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a true story. Donald matched that story word for word. I want to throw this song in for the benefit of the occasion. This is not a Seeger song. This was written in 1988 by a couple from Minneapolis named Neil and Leandro. The song is called "The Rancher's Lullaby," and as the song unfolds, I hope that you'll find that it really is fitting for the occasion of a memorial for Pete Seeger. There's a light out on the prairie, it's the only one in sight. He's been out here since the sunrise, half into the night. Now the moon is his companion, the stars his good friend, and the house on the horizon is where his day will end. He's got the cattle all accounted, fixed 1,000 miles of fence, checked the foal born last weekend, secured it in his pen. His eyes stretch across the prairie, there's a storm coming in. He pulls his collar up around him and leans into the wind. Rest a while, the cows have come home. Your calloused hands are tired to the bone. Don't try to sleep, just sit a spell alone and rest a while, the cows have come home. Sometimes he gets lonely out there on his own, but the feeling passes over like thunder in a storm. There's a coyote on the north ridge that knows how he feels. It only cries at nightfall when no Don't try to sleep, just sit a spell alone. Rest a while, the cows have come home. He made them promise when he's old and dying, they'd lay him down on the range to rest a while. The cows have come home. Your calloused hands are so tired to the bone. Don't try to sleep, just sit a spell alone. Rest a while, the cows have come home. Well, my introduction to folk music started when I was 13. I don't know if you remember Bill Higley, Willie Wah Willie. Well, Willie Wah Willie was a radio man, a radio DJ, who moved to Seattle area from Anchorage. Married a friend of the family, so I met him when I was 13. And here coming this guy with a pint of whiskey, Sears Roebuck guitar, and 22 dirty songs. It didn't take me long to learn the songs, but it took me many years to figure out why people laughed when people laughed. Anyway, he took me under his wing. He was my mentor. And so from the time I was about 13 till the time I was about 18, I mostly lived with Bill. I worked for him in the summers when he was being a charter boat captain out of Westport. And so he got me into the music then. And then in college, early college, I took a lot of musical training, a lot of musical focus, really. In fact, you and I and John and Irwin and Nancy Hubbard and the whole crew, we sang at nursing homes and hospitals, schools, an awful lot of schools. Of course, then I met Keeve Gray. You remember Keeve, contemporary players. And he got me on stage in the acting role. And so that's how it started. Then first year of college, I took a radio course, and I ended up talking myself into my own radio show at 18, I think, or 19, at Fort Lawton radio station. So I'd always had an interest in radio. And so from there, I just sung all my life. I, of course, had to make a living, so I made my whole living all my life as a carpenter, but I had one foot in the guitar case and one foot in the carpenter chest. So that's how that happened. Although the folk scene of the 50s was just incredible, just incredible. Well, God, we could find a hoot 5 nights a week. Anywhere. In fact, anytime I ever wanted to find music, I'd call your house, because people were usually singing at your house. But the folk scene in Seattle was incredible. It was vital. It was alive. Late 50s, early 60s, along came the coffee houses. My God, there were a dozen coffee houses. Then, of course, that morphed into the Seattle World's Fair at '62. And then eventually, 4 years later, that morphed into the Seattle Folklore Society, Pacific Northwest Folklore Society. And actually, Stu Hendrickson and I, we still continue that on with the Pacific Northwest Folklore Society, which is primarily a quarterly magazine available online. But we do a lot of concerts. We promote a lot of concerts. So the scene has never stopped. I suppose my lasting legacy will be the Bob Nelson collection of folk music. About a dozen years ago, I started looking at storage boxes I have of reel-to-reel tape recordings, and because we'd all been tape recording these hoots and jams and concerts and practice sessions since the mid-50s, and so I started assembling all my recordings into one area, and I ended up with 700 reel-to-reel tapes. They were not all just my own recordings. when Walt died, Walt Robertson, he willed me 22 of his tapes. I got more tapes from John Ashford. Patty McLaughlin, I got about 125 tapes I saved from her garbage dump. So make a long story short, I started about 7 years ago, and I assembled a whole bunch of tape recorders and all these tapes, and I started to archive them. There were about 350 cassette tapes, about 350 reel-to-reel tapes, and then some other incidental stuff, some 10-inch audio tapes from radio work. So I started converting them to from analog to digital, and converted them all to CDs. Then I went shopping for a final repository for this archive collection. Pete Seeger actually had something to do with that. At that last conversation I had with Pete on the telephone in Mark Moss's office, as long as we were talking, I said, well, what are we all going to do with all these tapes we've saved up? And at that time, Pete Seeger was working with Sing Out organization to establish a nationwide repository for future work. I have never followed that. I've never known where that went. It still might exist. Anyway, so I spent 5 years slowly converting all these audio tapes to digital and putting them all on CDs and organizing them in some kind of a meaningful fashion. Then I went shopping for a repository. We had a real strong bite from the University of Idaho, or Idaho State University at Pocatello, Idaho. So we did about a 10-day singing tour back there and ended up meeting with them, and I thought that was going to go, but that fell through. So then I was just on the stage of saying something like Phooey, and John Ashford came forth and set me up with ended up to be an interview with John Vallier at the University of Washington audio department. And John came up and spent about 5 minutes in my office looking at my collection, the organization I had, the 5 catalogs, everything. He spent 5 minutes. He says, I want it. So it took me, it took John and I 17 months of collaboration, but now that archive is available online at home. Just Google Bob Nelson Collection of Folk Music, and you can hear 7.5 straight hours of music recordings of the old hoots, the jams, the concerts, the practice sessions. But that's not the entire collection. That's only 141 songs. The entire collection resides at Suzzallo Library at the University of Washington. You can go in there, look at the catalog, and request to listen, and most likely to obtain a copy of all the entire collection. Well, I'll start with my own collections. Surprisingly enough, my tape recorder followed me everywhere I went. So it obviously starts out in the Puget Sound area. Then I spent 5 years in California, primarily Santa Cruz, San Francisco area. So I've got a lot of hoot recordings from there. With Patty's collection, her collection starts clear back in '53 in Wichita, Kansas. That was her roots. Then as she traveled west to California, so did her tape recorder. And so I've got recordings that go from Wichita to California, all through Puget Sound area. I've got recordings, all of Walt's. For 3 years, Walt Robertson managed the Ark in the town of Vancouver, Canada. And the Ark was an incredible folk house. And whenever he had the big name folk singers come through, he, for a concert, he would record them. So with Walt's collection, I've got, the likes of all the big names, Jeannie Redpath, Jesse Fuller, people of that caliber, people that were touring Canada nationwide in those days. And then Ed Bremer from KSER Radio happened to be the radio engineer in San Diego in 1958, when the entire board of directors of Sing Out magazine, including Pete Seeger and Guy Carawan and Utah Phillips and many, many others were in San Diego for 2 weeks of Sing Out Magazine planning, and every night during those 2 weeks they gave a public concert, and that's when Ed Bremer recorded them, and so I've got a wonderful collection of recordings that he made at that time. It's funny, I'm something of an enigma in that I can perform on stage, and I guess I'm okay at it. A lot of people tell me I'm a good performer, and I've studied performing, and I do a lot of performance coaching. The most pleasure I've really had the last 10 or 15 years has been doing performance coaching, not just for youngsters. We know several couples that are in their middle ages that are just coming together as musicians. And it's so easy, Sally, as a performer, you know this, Wendy, you too, to sit in an audience and pick a performance apart if the performance is being done by amateurs. And let me explain the word amateurs. I'm going to use the word ignorant, which is a harsh term, but I don't mean it harshly. If you've only sung 4 or 5 times in front of people on a stage, you don't know the mistakes you're making. There's no way you could know. You need to be taught a little bit. It's called stagecraft. So I have really enjoyed working with a lot of people over the last few years on performance coaching, what to do, what not to do. Don't sing 4 songs of the same key. Don't sing 5 songs all in a minor key. Don't sing 4 murder ballads in a row. Somebody's going to go home and kill their wives. And I've actually done some coaching at some music workshops on performance coaching. But my main enjoyment from where I go forward now, I want to sit in my little tiny office with my neat little audio digital recorder, and I want to lay down a couple hundred songs. I've got some songs that still have never been recorded. I mean, traditional songs that I have never heard recorded. I saved Walt Robertson's Clallam Girl, for example. I did record that on the CD. So I want to lay down a couple hundred songs before I die, just to save the material for the future. Again, it's always about the material for the future. I love folk music. Folk music has been great to me. I never wanted to exploit it commercially, and I don't even know if that's even possible. But it's so that's what I want to do.
How's that?
Yeah, I like that song. Got to try to remember Merritt's verse that he wrote, the last verse.
Yeah. Yeah.
When your friends have gathered round and they look down on you, they'll be gathered up above, they'll be singing songs for you. I wonder who will sing for me when I come to the place by the silent sea. That one?
Yeah. Right. I heard, I read an account by Peter Yarrow, who turned up at Pete's hospital.
I think you sent that to me. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What are you remembering?
No, I don't remember.
Okay, all right. Well, his family was gathered around, and Peter Yarrow had returned from Israel.
That's right.
And went there. I think Arlo Guthrie might have been there too.
That's right.
And they surrounded Pete's bed.
Yeah.
The night before he actually passed.
Yeah.
And sang. And one of those songs they sang.
That's right. You sent that to me. I really enjoyed reading that.
We Shall Not Be Moved.
Yeah.
And I think for any folk singer, with all the singing that you've done, you might be wondering who's going to sing for you. So, and if you don't wonder, you don't. It's because you don't have to.
You're asking me at a bad time. I'm just coming out of a heart event.
I know. You got it right. Okay, so this is a great song for those that have given their lives to
Yeah.
folk music.
Yeah. Where did I just sing this, honey? I think of this song a lot. I think of it a lot. I think of it more than I perform it. Oh,
Sang it
wow.
at Zevi's.
Yeah, Zevi's. Yeah, I've sung it. Zevi is our friend who we've sung every Thursday for almost 4 years now. He's dying of ALS. Every week he just diminishes. And I've sung this for Zevi. I've also sung Rancher's Lullaby for him. So, yeah. Okay, let's do this one. Whenever you're going to lead me in with a question or what?
We got it. Go for it.
Okay. Well, as long as we're singing songs about parting, I enjoy this song very much. And my dim memory says that the final verse I sing was written by Merritt Herring, a wonderful man. Oft I'm singing for my friends when death's dark for my sea. I often wonder who will sing for me. Sing along if you want. I wonder who will sing for me when I come to the place by the silent sea. Who will sing for me when our friends have gathered round and they look down on me? Will they turn and walk away, or will they sing one song for me? Hey, I wonder who will sing for me when I come to the place by the silent sea. Oh, who will sing for me when our friends are dead and gone and they look down on me? They'll be gathered up above, they'll be singing songs for me. I wonder who will sing for me when I come to the place by the silent sea. Tell me who will sing for me.